Okay, this is Atiha Sen Gupta, my daughter, who is also a writer.
Yeah, and I wrote my first play when I was 17 at the Hampstead Theatre, and I got involved with the youth group, which is called Heat and Light. And sadly, it's been collapsed because of government cuts to the council. But it was a place where young people could come together and kind of put on semi-professional plays, acting, directing, writing. And they did a lot of work with BME groups, which was really good. So it was about race and class and bringing people who are not normally in the mainstream into theatre. So I wrote a play called What Fatima Did, and it went on when I was 21. So that was in 2009. And yeah.
And it was, I suppose, when we were talking about the kinds of things we are allowed to write about, in a sense, this was, about a young woman who adopts the hijab in school, and how her group of friends, how the dynamics of the friendship change. And I think that, most theatres probably would have run scared of looking at the issue of hijab. But if a young Asian woman was, Atiha was writing it, there was a certain kind of safety from their point of view.
But I think it's superficial safety in the sense that the whole, if you go into identity politics, I'm not really a Muslim. I'm not Muslim at all. My mum is of Hindu origin, but my grandfather was a communist. So
We're not religious.
We're not religious. My father was Christian, but I don't follow that. So I'm not Muslim. I have no connection to Islam, and yet I was allowed to write that play.
Because I think there wasn't that degree of sophistication.
But there should be, shouldn't there?
If they want
to buy into that identity politics, I think you should write any play you like. If you're Chinese, you should write a play about a Nigerian. If you're Nigerian, you should write a play about a Jewish person. I think, but I've learned from just being in the theatre industry, there are a lot of issues with representation, and it does go back, even though people don't say it or articulate it, it does go back to who are you, and do you have the right to write this piece? That I was a bit naive, and I thought, oh, you can write whatever you like, but sadly you can't. You have to.
Because I remember after the success of Fatima was very successful, and I think it was very successful also not just because there were sold out houses, but for the first time I saw a woman in a full niqab and burqa in the theatre. Never ever seen that before or since.
And lots of young women in hijabs. Coming in, discussing it, getting angry or enjoying it, but talking about it.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
And then after that, you wrote a play about Cuba.
Yeah.
And I said to you, it was a very good play, and it was about, father-son dynamics. And I said to her, she's not going to be able to put it on easily, because people are going to say, well, what's your connection to Cuba? What do you know about it? And she'd lived in Cuba for 3 months or so by then, but that, even that I don't think would have given you. I said to you at that point, if Castro dies tomorrow, they might put it
still
on.
Waiting. But politically, I don't want him to die. But dramatically, it would be great if he could just arrange that. No, I'm on a serious note. It's sad that you can't. That's a lesson I keep coming back to, that you can't, you're constrained. And I think the Royal Court do this as well. They ask people to write what they know. And you went on a really interesting talk where you spoke about identity in Asian, South Asian theatre, didn't you? Which was recently.
Yeah.
And there was a man called Finn Kennedy who's a playwright, and he doesn't define himself as a white middle class man, but a lot of people on the panel who were all kind of not white middle class men defined him as such, and he often writes about young Asian girls, and and he was defending himself, saying, I have the right to write whatever play I like, as long as it's well researched, as long as it's, and I think I think he's correct, but he also runs workshops saying, turning that phrase "write what you know" on its head, and he calls it "write what you don't know." So I think his school of thought is really good. Very admirable.
No, it's interesting, and yes, and we should be able to do it. But then, if you're not able to place it, so you do something because it's a driving passion. So for you, writing about father-son relationship in Cuba was a driving passion at that point. But if you want to live as a writer, you know, and tomorrow somebody comes along and says, I'd like you to write about, I don't know, racism in Northwest too, you will say, yes, I'll do it.
You
Even
write for
if
the market.
you do
Sadly,
end up, to some extent. I mean, whatever you write, though, will probably still have the hallmark of your views. So you won't sell out in that way. But you may end up writing things that you hadn't thought of writing or wanted to particularly write, but somebody's commissioned you and said, do something along these lines. And you do.
So what about the first and second generation of identity we talked about earlier?
Yes.
In terms of how you represent yourself, how you...
Well,
The racism
what I
you
was
face?
saying earlier was that I found this particularly, I don't know if it's still an issue, but I certainly found it in the 80s and the 90s that second generation Asians here were, through their writing, trying to make sense of who they were, where did they belong? Were they Indian or Pakistani or were they British? They didn't feel that they belonged in either place, and they needed to resolve that or address that issue through their writing. So I don't know whether you feel there's any of that for you.
Sorry, I'm just conscious of the mic, so my hair fell. Well, I think that the writer, anyway, taking away races, the profession is about probing, asking questions, finding out who you are, where do you belong, and that's in a very general, broad way. But so definitely a black writer today or an Asian writer today in Britain would be asking those same questions, I think. And
Do you feel a kind of
there is still
confusion
a racism
around belonging, around a
Of
sense
course,
of who?
I definitely feel it, but I'm neurotic, so that, I mean, that, you know, I definitely feel a sense of where do I belong. I speak English with an English accent, my grammar is okay, you know, I can write English well, I'm very much English, I'm very British, but when I go out on the street, and this is me judging someone who I might think is white racist, and that, again, that's an issue with my prejudice, and I think, oh shit, you know, that person's gonna hate the fact, they're gonna hate me because I've got brown skin. I sort of see myself through the eyes of white racist society sometimes. In Britain, I don't feel, in London it's okay, but if you go to certain parts of London where there aren't that many immigrants or where there are racial conflicts, racial tensions, I'm constantly aware of it. I kind of hold myself as an Asian person. I don't really settle into just being British. And also, you know, we often talk about this, if we, you know, we're in Heathrow and there's an immigration official or anyone in authority or any person who may be white who treats you brusquely or is rude, we think, oh, he's racist or she's racist. He could just be having a bad day, he could be grumpy, he could be like that to white people, but we carry this kind of schizophrenic almost, this kind of, I don't know, I don't feel we haven't reconciled it. I haven't reconciled it. You know, I think that's very sad. And there is racism in the society. Ultimately, I might be more sensitive to it and maybe more paranoid about it, but it comes from, it's a reaction to a very real racism that I've faced and continue to face. And even in the theatre world, I remember I had written a short play with Roy Williams, who's a brilliant black playwright, British playwright, and he wrote the first 10 minutes for Hampstead Theatre for this youth group. And we had won a competition, 4 of us, to write 10 minutes more of his 10-minute piece. And we did it, it was successful, everyone was very happy. And I remember sitting next to a woman who was a white middle-class woman who was the head teacher of a very prominent comprehensive school in North London. She saw my play and came away and said, oh, that was wonderful. I didn't know Asian girls could write like that. And she said it to me, and I don't know if she knew I wrote it, but even if I was just another Asian girl, she could have made the leap that she shouldn't be saying that. She's a teacher who should see the best and potential of all children. And if they've done well, you should just be happy that a young person has done a good thing, a positive thing. Did you find much racism in the 80s? Do you feel like the nature of racism has changed?
Oh, I mean, well, I think that certainly more doors are open for us in the sense that when I came to, my coming to England, I felt I experienced as a shift in my class position because I came as a middle class person and there was a sense that as a middle class person in India, I would have had some access to the corridors of power. So if I wanted to be a writer, there's no doubt that I would
You
have
would
been
have
a writer.
you would have done it.
My
You would,
father would have, you know, rung up somebody and said, of course, you'd have to go forward on merit, but initially the door would open because of that. Whereas when I came to England, when I was studying, when I was doing my MPhil in drama, I was actually working in a shoe shop. And in the process, in the middle of my MPhil, you get a letter saying, would you like to extend it to a PhD? And, you know, my first thought was, oh my God, I'll be Dr. Gupta and I'll be working in a shoe shop. And that would be so
Not possible.
embarrassing, you know. And it didn't occur to me that I didn't have to use the word doctor, that one day I might not be working in a shoe shop. None of that occurred to me. So I thought, no, I'm not doing a PhD. I'm not extending it to PhD. Because, you know, it'd be completely sort of... that sense of a shift in class position that I...
Because of your race.
Because of my race.
Yeah.
Is how it was my experience of it at that point. And I really didn't ever think that I would make it as a writer in this country. So the first thing that was ever published, I was walking on air for 6 weeks, you know. I thought, wow, I've had something published. So, and then that gives you a bit more confidence. You think, oh, okay, I had one thing published, maybe I'll have something more published. And so then it kind of builds up. And I do think that today, there is, it's not just a wild dream if you want to be a writer.
It's more possible.
It is possible. It is more. There are still obstacles.
But I always say this about theatre. I feel this. I don't know how you feel, but even now, even today in 2013, where you have black playwrights, Asian playwrights, you know, and people who are not mainstream writing work, they might be applauded and celebrated, but they are celebrated for reflecting the black condition or the Asian tradition or the Chinese condition. You're not allowed, as a writer from a minority, you can't write about the human condition. I mean, you can as a writer, and you might think this is about, I'm stripping back, you know, I'm looking at a family and family dynamics, and you might think you're looking at something very fundamental, but you're still seen through a prism of race. By critics, by the theatre establishment. You're still sold as, oh, you know, I think there's now a fetish for Chinese British writing. I've noticed like 3 or 4, you know, and so it's like a fad. It's like flavour of the month. But so I find that quite patronising. I'd like to be able to write a play that, if it's good and if it does what it says on the tin, then it should be celebrated for being a play about humans rather than black people. Or do you know what I mean? Of course, I'm not trying to say we don't need the label black. I think black is important. It grounds us. It's our experience.
It also gives us a certain amount of visibility. Or
to claim black?
Well, I mean, strangely, you're more likely to get work sometimes because it fulfills somebody's quota.
Right, of writing about minority work.
Yeah. So, you know, they've ticked a box. And, I mean, you want to get past the box ticking, but you also have to recognize that the box ticking actually gets your foot... you need the box, and then you can break the boundaries, you know? Yeah. So... It's
a fine balance. People always say, surely we, you know, there's that big debate, should you use the term black or are we just writers, you know? But I don't know, it's a fascinating debate. I don't have an answer. I think it's both. You should both see yourself as a black writer and see yourself as a writer and try and reconcile those two.
I mean, when somebody says, what do? You don't say, I'm a black writer.
No.
You say...
I'm a writer.
Yeah, I'm a writer.
Right, that's really true.
So in a sense, it's other people who see you as a black writer. So if you talk, like you just said about Roy Williams, you said Roy Williams, the black writer.
I say it as a kind of celebration because he is seen as the best black,
and he is,
best British black playwright. It's hard to say those words. So I say it because he's known as that. But why should I? I shouldn't. But I'm saying it in the context. I need to reference his race. But yeah, why did I say that? It's interesting.
I suppose because so few of us have made it, and he has made it, and he is very good.
Against more obstacles, perhaps, than a white counterpart.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think so, absolutely.
Yeah.